Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video I'm going to walk you through the Saturday sweater, which is a free pattern that you'll find on mooglyblog.com. If you go to the video description, you'll find a link out to the tutorial with right and left-handed versions, as well as a link to the written pattern and all the information you need to make it, including the yarn and hook. For this pattern, we'll be using Red Heart Fashion Soft. This pattern comes in 8 sizes, so for the small you'll need 2 balls, and for the largest sizes you'll need 4 balls. This pattern also calls for a USK 6.5 millimeter hook, or whatever hook, of course, you need to get gauge. Let's begin. Okay, the Saturday sweater is made in 2 pieces. Here you can see the front piece. These are just simple rows. There's no actual shaping in this sweater, so the stitch pattern itself is very simple. It's made from the top down. Let's take a look at it together. All right, here we have the front of the sweater again, and this is actually upside down. So here we have the neckline, and this is the way you make it. This is the top of the sweater, and you go on down towards the hem. And I just want to show you again close up. You can see there's no shaping here. We just work right across. So in order to create this, what we need to do is make one of the shoulders, this section right here. Then we break the yarn, set it aside, make the second section, and then when we come across for what would be this row here, sorry, get that on screen here. It's a kind of a big sweater. It's hard to get all this on screen. So when we come across for the mesh row, we get to the end across of this piece, and then we start chaining, and no matter what size you make, that's a chain of 23. And then you pick up that second piece and just start crocheting the mesh again right into there. So that creates the neckline shape. We do the same thing on the back. Let's take a look at that. This is the back neck. You can see it's just a much smaller notch here at the back of the neck. And for this piece, we actually just make the first row, set it aside for the first shoulder, make the second row's shoulder, come back across with the mesh, do the same thing again, chain 23, and then rejoin by just starting to work the mesh again into that second shoulder, and then we just continue to crochet across the next row. Whether it's the front or the back, you just crochet across the top of the mesh, crochet in each one of those chains, and then back across, and you're back to one piece. So then you'll have a front piece and a back piece. Now, taking another closer look at this stitch pattern, you can see it is really, really simple. It's just rows of double crochet followed by a row of double crochet, chain 1, skip 1, double crochet, chain 1, skip 1. We can make a little bit of this together too. All right, let's work the stitch pattern together. Now, each of the pieces, both the front and the back and both shoulders of this pattern, begin with a row of foundation double crochets. Now I have a separate tutorial for that, and I will link out to that in the blog post with these tutorials as well, but I'll demonstrate it here really quickly just for the sake of completion here. We've got a chain 2 to begin. Those will not count as a stitch. I'm going to yarn over, go into the first chain I made there, yarn over, pull up a loop, and that little loop right there that I just made is going to count as the chain at the base of our first stitch. So I need to yarn over and pull through that to start my double crochet, and then I can finish it as normal. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, and pull through 2. And that's our first foundation double crochet. After that, they're all the same on across. We yarn over, insert our hook under the 2 loops at the bottom of the stitch we just made, that loop, those loops that sort of counted as our chain, pull up a loop, and that's the chain for our new stitch, yarn over, pull through 1, that begins our double crochet, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, and pull through 2. Now, no matter what size you're making of this sweater, it's going to start with an odd number of stitches. So if you find that you don't like the foundation double crochet and you want to use a standard chain and double crochet in each of those to begin your pieces, you can absolutely do that. Just make sure that you end up with the correct stitch count, the correct number of actual double crochets at the end of each of those rows. However you want to begin those rows, whether it's with a chainless starting double crochet or a chain 3 to count as your first double crochet, is totally up to you. So I'm just going to crochet a few more stitches here until we've got an odd number, like so. And then I'm actually going to go ahead and break this yarn and set it aside, and I'll make an identical piece, and then I can demonstrate how that second row comes together. But really for that first row, it's just foundation double crochets. And if you're making the front, you'll work several more rows before you break it to make the other shoulder. If you're making the back, it is just one row before you break it and make the shoulder. Other than that, the front and back are identical. I will see you as soon as I've got those made. Okay, so I've got 11 foundation double crochets made. This is a bit smaller than any of the actual sizes of the sweater, but it'll be enough for us to demonstrate. To begin row 2 in the pattern, it says to start with a chain of 4. If you'd like, you can substitute the chainless starting double crochet and a chain 1. Once again, I will link out to that tutorial as well in the written tutorial on the blog. So I've got my chain 4 here. That counts as a double crochet and chain 1. So I'm going to skip over that stitch right there because we've essentially got a stitch for it. Then we skip the next stitch and work into the stitch after that with a double crochet. And then from there, it's just our repeat on across, chain 1, skip the next stitch, double crochet in the stitch after that, all the way across to the end of our piece. Row 3 is just double crocheting in each stitch and each chain space apart. Like I said, this couldn't be a simpler stitch pattern. Now, if you're making the front piece, you'll have several rows before you break your first shoulder and begin the second one. However, if you are making the back of the sweater, then it's just that first row you've set aside as the first shoulder. So I've already made a piece with 11 stitches here, and I'm going to join this as if it was the first shoulder for my back piece. So, and that's what I would do after having made the second row on the second shoulder. Then I would chain 23 is what's listed in the pattern. I'm not going to chain 23 this time. I'll just chain, let's see, we'll chain 7. 4, 5, 6, 7, make it a little bit more proportional. And then what I want to do is I want to make sure that I join this first shoulder I've made when it's in the right direction. So I want to find my finish end, the end where I finished off, and my beginning end, and make sure they match with where the beginning end and where I'm working are on this piece. So since this was my beginning end with my slip knot, I would make sure that's facing the same direction as the beginning slip knot on the one I'm working on. So after I've made those chains, and this part's a little bit fiddly, I'm going to yarn over and then go into that first stitch, that last stitch I made on the first shoulder, and work a double crochet right in that stitch. The hard part is just sorting out all those little ends. And it helps too if you just hold the chain and the stitches real close together as you make that stitch, and that will keep it from pulling up too big and tall, like so. So if that chain ends up a little too big right there, like that one I think is just a little big, I'm going to go ahead and pull that stitch out and do it again. I'll yarn over, go into that stitch, hold them close so I can get a good double crochet in there. There we go. And that's a bit better. That chain isn't so loose up there now at the top of that double crochet. So from there I can just continue working our stitch pattern across. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, double crochet in the next. Just let that hang. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, double crochet in the next, and that just repeats right on across to the very last stitch. If you've got an extra stitch left, then you might have missed one. Make sure you've joined that first stitch, the last stitch made on this row, that you didn't miss one there. Need a little bit more yarn here. Here we go. And we are at that last stitch already. There we are. And that's how you work row 2, especially for the back, so that we've got our little neckline made. You can see it's actually a 2-row neckline, but we've made it while making the second row. Then to work that third row on across, we just start with a chain 3 or a chainless starting double crochet, whichever you prefer, and then we work a double crochet in the chain 1 space. There we are, and a double crochet in the stitch. So for row 3, we just double crochet in each chain space and each stitch across until we get to that neckline chain in the middle. If you're already at the point where you've made your neckline, if you're on the front, this will be several rows in where you have to work into that chain. But when we get to that chain, we just want to work into each of the individual chains. Now, we could try and work 23 individual stitches just around the chain itself, like we're working to the chain spaces here, but that tends to get a little messy. The stitches don't all stay perfectly even. And as much as we hate crocheting into all those little chains, it just gives a much better finished look to the sweater if you take the time and crochet into each one of those chains individually for your double crochets. There we are. And we just work into each one of those chains. I'm sure you've got the idea at this point. You've seen me double crochet many, many times, hopefully. So, and if not, you've just seen me do it a whole bunch more. So there's a bunch of double crochets, there's double crochets, and there's the mesh row. So let's take another quick look at the pieces of the sweater. And here we are looking at the front again, and I just wanted to take another look. You can see I've worked all these rows before I broke that first shoulder, and then came back across. This would have been the mesh row right here with those chains. And then when I came back across with the double crochets, worked over my end a little bit there, so ignore that end. But when I worked back across with my double crochets, each one of those was worked into an individual chain. So like I said, at that point then you're just working even until it is time to come in for the body. Because since we're working from the top down, we've got our entire sleeve width right here, and then we need to come in a little bit for a closer fitting body. So we've got a little, I think it's about 3.5 inch sleeve right here. So when you've finished the sleeve rows, then you're going to break that yarn again and rejoin and start back up with the mesh pattern on, it'll be the 13th stitch in. So you'll count in 13 stitches and then start up the mesh pattern again, all the way across till you get to the end. Whoops, there's one of my hairs. Sorry about that. There we go. So you get all the way across, and then you'll have 12 unused stitches on this side. So you'll end in sort of that 13th stitch in from the other side, and that creates our sleeve shape. And then from there, it's just working even again all the way to the bottom. And then it's time to match up our seams. Okay, now this is where our stitch markers or clips are going to come in. Here I've got the back of the sweater, and I know it's kind of cramped on my table here, but unfortunately this is about as far out as we can get with the camera. So what we want to do is find the sides of the sweater that we want to make the outside. Now this is totally optional. If you prefer the look of one side over another, then you can make that the outside of your sweater. Right side, wrong side is totally up to you. That said, I strongly recommend that you make sure it's the same sides showing on the front and the back. So whichever side you decide is the wrong side versus the right side, make sure you put those wrong sides together on the inside of the sweater. So make sure those match. And then once you've got that part matched up, then you need to match up the pieces themselves on the stitches. And so I've got my front neckline right here. You can see I've got the same number of stitches on that shoulder as I have on that shoulder, so those are going to match up. This will be the sleeve opening, so I do not want to sew this end closed, but I do want to sew together along the bottom of the sleeve and then down along the side of the body, like so. So I'm going to show you a little bit more about that in a minute, but I just want to show you this is where those stitch markers come in. I like to match up my stitches so that not just the first stitch and the last stitch of those seams are perfectly matched, but I will actually go through and count every so many stitches and add another stitch marker and make sure so that when I go to sew it together, it's perfectly matched, because it's pretty easy. You know, you're just sewing along, watching TV, doing whatever, thinking about your day, and it's pretty easy to miss one of those stitches. So I'll start by matching up the first and last, and then I'll work my way in and just make sure that those will be perfectly matched. And then I'll do that again along the bottom of the armpit, both shoulders, and down the side. Now, I said I'd talk a little bit more about the side seam. Let me turn that so it's a little bit easier to see here. Now, this pattern, again, hopefully you've gone and gotten the written pattern from the blog, actually comes in a couple of different lengths. I wanted to make mine a little bit shorter, more hip length, but I heard from a lot of you on my other videos that you wanted more tunic length, so I've included instructions for that too. Whether you're making the hip length or the tunic length though, you're going to want to leave a little gap, sort of on a skirt. I think it's called a kick flap. I'm not sure if there's a name for it on shirts, but a little opening there on the side, so there's a little bit more wiggle room and it doesn't pull around the hips at all. It gives you a little bit more hip room there too. So how much of a gap to leave there is totally up to you. I have some recommended measurements on the blog. For the hip, I like to leave a 5-inch gap here at the bottom. For the tunic length, I'd probably start there and leave the whole thing free again, which I think adds up to about 8.5 inches. But wherever you're comfortable, absolutely, I'd say as you sew this seam up, don't weave this end in right here. Leave a good length hanging so that you can try it on and see if that lands exactly where you want it to be. Also, I'd say try it on not just at that point to make sure that the little flap has enough space, but to make sure that the overall length is right. Because at this point, since we've worked top down, you can absolutely add more rows. If you decide, once you try it on, you decide, you know what, that's not long enough, just add more rows. If it's too long already, don't weave that end in just yet, and you can pull a few rows out. Totally customize the length on this sweater. So once you've got all those seams sewn together, then from the right side, whichever side you've decided is the right side, you'll want to make sure and work just a simple row of single crochet along the flap and all the way around the sweater. So you won't come up here, you'll go across the bottom a little bit, up that little kick flap there, and then across that side, and then do the same thing on the other side of the sweater. And then along the sleeves, you'll work that single crochet edging, and then also all around the neckline, which will of course go front and back. How you actually sew these seams together, I haven't even talked about that part, have I? That is again kind of up to you. There are so many different methods to use to sew your seams. I'm going to go ahead and recommend that you sew this using the whip stitch, which I will link out to also. Again, follow the link in the description. It's got its own tutorial for how to whip stitch pieces together, and that will be really handy. And that'll show in really nice close-up too how you sew those pieces together. So as we take a look right here, you can see the finished sweater, and I'm wearing it. This is the size large. I made the large size myself. I wear about a size 14 in women's clothing to give you an idea of how it fits. I think next time I might try making a size down just for a little bit slimmer fit, but I really like the way this turned out, and I hope you like making it too. So once again, go to the link in the description and follow that link, and you will find everything you need to make this sweater in 8 different sizes. So I hope you'll give it a try. It's a lot easier than it looks. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the Moogly Blog channel.